Any questions?
Andre, we're, like you said, a year after G20, long time after your report. The Public Works Protection Act is going to be scrapped. Are you satisfied, one, with the government's follow-up to the violation of human rights, and two, should this PWP have been scrapped by now?
Well, yes. I mean, in fact, the act is still in effect, which is a strange thing to be to see. However, the government's agreed that they will not invoke it, so I don't think we're under any imminent risk of arbitrary arrest or detention. I'm satisfied they've acted on both the main recommendations that I have made. Retired Chief Justice McMurtry confirmed the validity of our findings, and as far as I'm concerned, the book is closed on that. You have to remember, though, that my jurisdiction for the G20 is very narrow. I do not oversee police action, police behavior. I do not oversee the federal government, of course. I oversee the provincial government. It's a very narrow field. You know, I think the police have a lot of answering to do for the G20. When you have thousands of arbitrary arrests and detentions, you have 1,000 charges, of which about 60% have either been withdrawn or abandoned. People are asking, rightfully so, a lot of questions. Unfortunately, my office is not in position to answer them.
Do you think we'll get answers based on the network and system set up to look into it now?
There's so many reviews that are ongoing. Perhaps next year, if you ask me the question, I'll let you know what my views are. I'm anxious to see these things proceed. The Toronto Police Service Board has their review. The provincial government office that reviews public complaints is still, against the police, is still working on their report. So I think I'm looking forward, and I'm anxious to see the matters resolved.
Do you have some thoughts on how the SIU has performed in
Yeah.
relation to this?
Yes, I think the SIU, it doesn't take the ombudsman to tell you that there's fundamental, very serious problems with the SIU. I don't think you can pick up any newspaper on any given day that you won't hear about difficulties the SIU is experiencing. And it's hard to build confidence, public confidence, by yo-yo oversight. And that's what you're getting. It's a yo-yo. One day there's an investigation is closed, the other day it's reopened, up and down, and the public has a hard time having confidence in the process of the SIU. But I think we have to look beyond the SIU. The SIU is struggling to implement a lot of the recommendations that we have made. We have a follow-up report that will be issued within a matter of months on the SIU that will deal with it. The SIU, I think, is a victim of being in the front line, and because of that, it's getting a lot more hits than it deserves. And I think the SIU needs broader government backup. Is it normal that an independent investigative body like the SIU can spend years without issuing an annual report? Is it normal that the SIU doesn't lay charges, but the reports from the director are still kept secret? These are issues that extend beyond the authority of the SIU. I think the SIU is fledgling. I think that there's a lot of imbalance of power between the police agencies and the SIU. And I think the broader government, the mother house, has to account for its lack of support of the SIU.
So your follow-up report that's coming later this year, will that be on the SIU vis-a-vis the G20, or is it more about the other recommendations that you've made about the SIU that I take it have still not been acted upon, including when officers get interviewed and things like that?
That's correct. There's two issues that the report will address. It is the backing, the moral backing by the government of the SIU's activities. And the second one is the weak and meager infrastructure, the legislative backup that the SIU has, which needs urgent review. So those are the two issues that the follow-up report will look at. And it is, the release of that report is imminent.
So just to clarify, in looking at the SIU, you can only look at it vis-a-vis how the government oversees it, as opposed to looking at the SIU
No,
itself?
we could do both. The first report that we issued on the SIU a few years ago looked at both aspects. The second one will focus more on whether the SIU is getting the legislative backup and the moral backup of government to do its job. I think the SIU, if you've been following the SIU, they've been much more open to the public. The director has been much more accountable to the public. He's gone a long way to account for his activity and for the difficulties he's facing getting cooperation from the police. The remaining issue is, why is the SIU apparently still failing in the performance of their duty?
Monsieur Marin, en français, dans quelle proportion est-ce que les plaintes qui touchent Hydro sont reliées aux compteurs intelligents et quel genre de plaintes? Donnez-nous un ou deux exemples de plaintes que vous avez reçues.
Environ 60 plaintes des 316 relèvent des nouveaux compteurs d'Hydro. Donc, ce n'est pas une proportion qui est très élevée. Les problèmes qu'on voit avec Hydro, c'est des problèmes dans le relevé des comptes. Il y a des erreurs qui sont dans les relevés, dans les comptes qui sont envoyés aux citoyens. Et ces erreurs-là ne sont pas identifiées assez tôt dans le processus. Et puis, les citoyens viennent nous voir et nous, évidemment, on soulève les problèmes avec Hydro et on les règle. On voit qu'Hydro, c'est quand même considérable. 316 plaintes, je crois. C'est une hausse assez importante d'une année à l'autre. Hydro accounts for about 316 complaints this year, about 60 of them about smart meters. The vast proportion of hydro complaints are about spikes in billing issues, errors in billing, lack of explanation for increases in billing. And I think citizens are very acutely aware of Hydro One right now because of various hikes in publicity around the amounts of money that are being charged to citizens about Hydro. There's an incredible raised awareness among citizens, and because of that, it's resulted in a spike in complaints. I want to say that our total complaints level compared to last year, our total complaints numbers are up 11%, which is not insignificant. And secondly, the complaints regarding the mush sector are up 500, from 1,500 approximately to approximately 2,000. So those are two important factors that I think the government cannot ignore.
Vous me permettez un suivi en français,
Oui.
Monsieur Marin. Le fait que le secteur hydroélectrique, a plus d'attention et deuxièmement, risque de se compliquer avec les compteurs intelligents et la smart grid, etc. Est-ce que vous attendez à plus de plaintes dans le futur et si oui, pourquoi?
Il va y avoir plus de plaintes. Moi, j'ai aucun doute à mon esprit qu'il va y avoir plus de plaintes parce qu'il y a une conscience au niveau du public qui n'était pas là avant. Et puis, le public doit essuyer de comptes qui sont plus élevés que dans le passé. Et puis, pour ces deux raisons-là, je crois qu'il va y avoir plus de plaintes. Nous, on a éprouvé pas mal de succès avec ces plaintes-là. Lorsqu'on a soulevé les griefs auprès d'Hydro 1, ils ont été bien acceptés pour le moment. Nous ne comptons pas avoir d'enquête systémique parce qu'on voit les résultats de nos contacts avec cette agence gouvernementale.
Did you resolve most of those hydro complaints? And what did you find, I guess,
You know,
when you looked into them?
Yes, we've been dealing with them on a case-by-case basis, and we've had a fair bit of success in resolving them. Hydro has been very cooperative. So as long as they're being cooperative and we're able to move them along, we have decided not to, at this point, launch a systemic investigation. I can tell you, out of the issues we've dealt with in the last year, one of the areas, there's two things that gives me concern over the caseload, and one is the increase in complaints regarding from inmates in jails. And I know that in the past, you've heard me say that generally the complaints from inmates have been on issues that are not life and death. The wilted lettuce complaints, the expired bread complaints, those kinds of things. And we haven't found really much concern, and we've actually pushed back the investigation of internal issues back to the prison system. This year, however, and this is discussed at page 20 and 21 in our annual report, we have seen, and I say I'm very troubled by this, a prevalence of cases coming forward of use of force by prison guards, which is covered up. Whether there is no use of force report or pages are missing from occurrence reports when use of force was exercised. And this is not limited to one or two institutions. It appears to be something that's happening out there. And it's giving me a tremendous amount of concern. And if there is one area that we're looking at very seriously launching a systemic investigation, is to the use of force by correctional officials regarding inmates and the proper documenting of it. because use of force needs to be documented. It used to be investigated. And unfortunately, we found some serious lapses in the system that are documented at page 20 and 21 of the report.
Could you talk a little bit more about the MUSH sector, particularly when it comes to public housing and the CAS, and how people of this province and children, I guess in the case of the CAS, are suffering because of a lack of an independent ombudsman?
You know, I call it power protectionism. It's to protect those who have the power. And unfortunately, in the current system, we oversee many of the bureaucrats in skyscrapers in downtown Toronto who come up with policy, but we don't oversee how that policy is delivered in the hands of the public. Children's Aid Society consumes $1.4 billion in public funds, huge amount of money, dealing with the most vulnerable people in society. There is no oversight mechanism that will investigate independently and report back to the public on how they are doing in performing their duty. We're the only province in Canada that doesn't do that. Something is wrong here. Hospitals, we're the only province in Canada where the Ombudsman has no oversight in hospitals. The public health sector consumes half the public treasury in Ontario. Why is it that you can't go anywhere to complain about a hospital? It doesn't make any sense. And so those are the two areas which I think are really no-brainers. You know, Ombudsman oversight is not about expenditure of money. It's about value for money. You want to know that your dollar is actually being put to use, that your dollar is being well spent, that people within our hospitals are performing reasonably. You don't have that assurance today. You've got the odd website that provides data. You've got government issuing self-congratulatory reports from time to time, but you have to take their word for it. I think the day of massaging the message are over, and I think there's an incredible public appetite for that information. And unfortunately, there's a shortage of information, and then there's a shortage of oversight, which means that we don't get answers, because we don't have those checks and balances in those places.
When you talk about children, so you mentioned that the number of complaints about families that have to maybe, hand over their kids with special needs to get care has increased, not by much, but it's still up. How concerned are you by that?
You know, one case is one case too many. It's actually very serious when parents of special needs children are being forced to give up custody of their children in order for them to get proper care. And this is not new. It's been well documented in the media. We've had one report before, but the system seems to be not tuned to the reality of dealing with these issues. Now, fortunately, when they do arise from time to time, we're there, we bring it up to the government's attention, and it's fixed. But it shouldn't be fixed through the finger in the dike approach. It should be more systemic in its approach. We should be finding ways to better cope. And unfortunately, the government has not yet found a solution to this problem. So we are on it. We're on top of it. And every time it happens, we knock on the ministry's door and we get it fixed, even though it shouldn't be happening.
Mr. Marin, the overview is good, but one of the things that always strikes people are the individual stories. You talk about the case summaries. Could you talk a bit about one of the Hydro One cases that sort of struck you the most that you investigated and had an impact on?
Well, there's not one in particular that I really want to identify, except that our report has several hundreds example this year. But, cases where people are on the verge of being cut off from electricity. I'll give you one. The case, for example, we talk about in the report where the wife of a member of the military was almost cut off electricity until we intervened because of the spike in her bills. I mean, in a sense, that's a very cruel case. We talk about it in the report about how we had to intervene because of the increase in the cost of electricity, and she was not able to cope with the new billing. So these are kinds of cases where we were able to come in here and humanize government, humanize the cold-hearted bureaucracy, and that always gives me a great deal of satisfaction. And we do that by the thousands every year, and we remain very quiet in working them through the back end, informally, and this time of the year is where we come out and tell you about those cases.
In terms terms of the SIU, when you talked about the legislative backup, can you just be a bit more specific? I mean, is it a case where they don't have enough powers to investigate, or are the powers not strong enough, or?
No, the SIU has been in place since 1990. We're now in 2011. You could take a selection of different police agencies in Ontario and ask them what serious injury means. And it's one of the facts that triggers the SIU's mandate. And if you ask 12 of them, you might well get 12 different definitions of serious injury. The SIU must be notified immediately when there's serious injury or death. What does immediately mean? To some police agencies, immediately could mean right away, or to others could mean once they've notified their chief of police. So there's a lot of gray in the operation of the statute that has meant that the police have taken advantage of the gray zones and have exploited the SIU's ability to do its job. Why is it that the director's report, when there's no charges, cannot be made public? Why? What good reason, what valid reason is there to maintain secrecy over the director's report? I can't think of any. So those are three examples of where there needs to be clarification in the mandate. But there appears to be no appetite to move in that direction. But like I said, we have a report that's imminent. The release is imminent, and we'll keep you posted.
Monsieur Marin, au bureau des obligations familiales. Je ne sais pas si c'est moi, mais ça fait peut-être 8 ans que je couvre la politique à Queen's-Park. Ça fait 8 ans que, à chaque année, le bureau des obligations familiales, il y a des problèmes. Est-ce qu'il y a des améliorations, vous voyez, ou est-ce que c'est juste un problème systémique? Il faudrait tout enlever tout ça puis recommencer à zéro?
Écoutez, moi, je considère sérieusement une autre enquête systémique du bureau des obligations familiales. En ce moment, notre bureau, on y va à la mitaine, c'est-à-dire qu'on a une plainte, on va, on fait enquête, on fait une enquête informelle, on règle le problème, ça devient une autre statistique pour notre rapport annuel. C'est pas la façon souhaitable ou idéale de régler des cas. Et puis, vous avez raison que c'est un problème qui est presque systémique, parce que d'une année après l'autre, que ce soit le rapport de l'Ombudsman, du vérificateur général, des observations de la part des médias, il y a des problèmes au bureau des obligations familiales.
Le principal problème.
Bien, les délais, l'incompétence parfois, l'inaptitude, c'est des problèmes qu'on voit d'un cas à l'autre. Et puis c'est un peu décourageant. Et puis pour cette raison-là, nous considérons sérieusement une enquête systémique dans la prochaine année pour essayer de voir s'il n'y a pas façon d'éclairer la situation et de donner des recommandations pour pouvoir une fois pour tout sortir du pétrin et puis mieux desservir ceux qui dépendent de ce bureau-là pour survivre. Yes, the Family Responsibility Office has, for many years, been the bane of the existence of provincial watchdog, whether it's the Ombudsman's Office or the Auditor General's Office. It seems that year after year, they're always in the top categories of agencies complained about. Sometimes the complaint is about delay, sometimes ineptitude, incompetence, putting a writ on the wrong house, misreading court orders, and it's discouraging. Now, the encouraging part is we have a good working relationship with the FRO. We're able to move cases along, but it's not a happy situation. It's not the ideal situation to resolve a case. And so it's an area in which we are seriously considering a systemic investigation to try to bring a more fundamental and systemic solution to the problem.
Do you think it's necessary to continue with the FRO? I mean, in a lot of cases, it's really just like almost like a money laundering system for, in a lot of cases, you don't really need anyone to do that in situations where there's not a problem. Do you really think it's necessary to continue with FRO?
Christina, the ultimate decision of that will be for the elected representatives to make. It's a public policy decision. Certainly from the perspective of an ombudsman, I see people who rely on the FRO as a means of feeding themselves. The problem is the FRO is still grasping with the proper model of intervention. And right now, I'm wondering whether we should not revisit the whole structure because it hasn't been producing the results. It has not been able to live up to its expectations. There's one final point I would like to make. On page 21, we talk about the Office of the Public Guardian and Trustee. And that is an office which, of course, plays an extremely important role with very vulnerable people, helping administer property and money. And we have found many instances, and they're documented at page 21, of rudeness, of ethnic slurs against people calling in. And it's, again, very troubling because but for our intervention, these matters would have just been swept under the carpet. And so the Office of the Public Guardian and Trustee occupy a very important position, and it's one that's clearly under our radar for the coming year. Je répète en français, le Bureau du tuteur et curateur public exerce un rôle très important en Ontario pour aider à administrer des fonds des individus qui sont incapables de le faire. Et puis, nos interventions dans le domaine du Bureau du tuteur et du curateur public démontrent qu'il y a eu plusieurs instances d'incompétence à ce bureau-là, que ce soit à répondre à des plaintes ou à gérer des dossiers. Et puis, c'est un des domaines qu'on a ciblé pour l'année qui va suivre comme domaine qui va possiblement mener à une enquête systémique pour s'assurer que, justement, ce bureau important est capable de remplir ses responsabilités en vertu de la loi.
In the report that senior officials from your office meet on a quarterly basis with FRO, with the Office of the Public Guardian and Trustee, and with Ministry of Community and Social Services. I mean, these are agencies that are delivering direct services to people at their most vulnerable time. And yet
Yes.
you seem to have an ongoing conversation with them on issues. I mean, do you find that troubling?
Oh, it's very troubling because it's extremely time-consuming, and it's a labor of love by the very dedicated people that I have on staff, and it's more than frustrating at times, I can assure you. It's not an ideal way of doing business when you have to continually go in and bring people's files in and sit down and arm wrestle a solution from case to case. That being said, at least we're able to deliver some results to people that are aggrieved by these bodies. But it begs the question, is there not a more endemic systemic problems with how these bodies are run? And certainly from the complaint trends we see, the answer to that would be yes.
Are you looking at, I mean, you correctional services, you outline these cases where some material, reports went missing and things like that. But it says you're just monitoring this, or are you launching a special investigation into this?
We're very close to launching a special investigation concerning this area. What we've done right now is we've referred these complaints back to the ministry, and the ministry has an internal investigative branch who's looking into these mysterious disappearance of use of force report. In some cases, they were not completed. In other cases, pages are missing from files. So we're waiting back for the ministry to get back to us, and we'll make the decision when we do hear back from them.
And yet you note that it's been as late as 2009 that you've noticed this.
Yes, and we've noticed that there is a troubling trend out there of mysteriously disappearing documents or non-preparation documents. So, as I said, this is an area where in the coming months we may have more to say. The ministry, we're waiting a report from the ministry on what's happened to these files.
When you talk about the need for more open government and a lack of transparency, are you seeing a bit more of a culture of secrecy in the government now than before, or is this just sort of a general call for more access to a lot of the sectors?
I think the answer to your question is both. There has been when you look back at the cases from the last 6 years, and I look at these cases from different angles, and a common thread is the closed government from one case to the next, and how that has led to the problems we've uncovered. And if you go back, for example, look at our case, the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation, how the corporation hid comparables from the public, how it kept secret its formula for assessing property. Jump to the lottery system, where the lottery corporation's motto used to be hold your nose and pay it out, even though you know that there's fraud rampant within the system. Move forward to the SIU investigation, where directors' reports are not being published, where annual reports are being censured by the Ministry of the Attorney General. How can you have an independent agency which cannot publicly report on its activities without Big Brother approving of them? And it culminates into the, I think, the granddaddy of all secret maneuver, which was the publication of a regulation, or rather the non-publication of a regulation, which extended extraordinary, likely illegal powers to the police during the G20, which was not publicized. How are citizens supposed to abide by their obligations when they don't know what the law is? It's one of the fundamental principles. So the answer to your question is yes on both counts. It's a common thread that I have seen in 6 years, which culminates into the G20, which has led to, as we know, massive deprivation of civil liberties in Ontario. Thank you very much.